I got canceled and I have no idea what I did. I checked my Instagram one morning and froze. I'd gone from 1.2 million followers to barely 200,000 overnight. My comments were flooded with death threats and people saying they couldn't believe I'd done something so disgusting and that I deserved whatever was coming to me. Shaking, I scrolled through my recent posts looking for anything controversial, but it was just the usual sponsored skincare routine and photos from my trip to Miami last week. Nothing political or offensive, just the same lifestyle content I'd been posting for 3 years. But every single comment before I disabled them was calling me evil and saying I should be in prison. Someone had leaked my home address and people were showing up at all hours, throwing rocks at windows and spray painting Predator on my car. My brand partnerships started sending termination emails within hours, saying they couldn't be associated with someone like me. The makeup company I'd worked with for 2 years said I'd violated their morality clause, though they wouldn't specify how. They were demanding $3 million in damages and had frozen my assets through an emergency court order. The athletic wear brand demanded I return everything and remove all mentions of them from my social media. I called my manager begging her to tell me what was happening, but she said she was just as confused as I was. She'd been getting calls all morning from brands cutting ties and refusing to say why. My best friend Hazel wouldn't answer my calls. She texted saying she needed space to process what she'd learned about me, and couldn't believe I'd been hiding my true self. When I asked what she'd learned, she blocked my number. 3 days later, someone recognized me at a coffee shop and threw hot coffee in my face while live streaming it. I hired a social media crisis manager who said she'd never seen anything like this. She searched for the source but couldn't find any original post or video calling me out. It was like everyone had simultaneously decided I was canceled without any triggering event. She quit after receiving death threats just for working with me, and her other clients started dropping her too. I thought maybe someone had made a deepfake of me doing something horrible. I reverse searched every image and video looking for manipulated content but found nothing. A digital forensics expert confirmed no fake content of me existed anywhere on the internet. My mom called crying, asking how she'd raised someone capable of what I'd done. When I begged her to tell me what she thought I'd done, she just said the evidence was undeniable, and she needed time to process. My sister posted on Facebook that she was no longer associated with me. She had to drop out of college after other students found out we were related and started harassing her daily. My dad's business lost all its clients within a week. I tried posting online asking why I was suddenly so hated, and people just asked if I was seriously pretending to be clueless. The influencer house I lived in asked me to move out immediately because the other creators felt unsafe around me. When I packed my things, everyone stayed locked in their rooms. The house manager called the police and had me forcibly removed while live streaming it to warn other influencer houses about harboring predators. My YouTube channel got demonetized and TikTok permanently banned me for violating community guidelines. My Patreon subscribers all canceled and many requested refunds. Several filed a class action lawsuit claiming emotional distress from unknowingly supporting someone like me. My credit cards were all canceled and I was blacklisted from every major bank. My podcast co-hosts released an episode without me explaining they couldn't platform someone like me. 3 months later, I was completely unemployable with 0 followers and living with my parents who barely spoke to me. Actually, I was living in my car. My parents kicked me out after their house was vandalized for the 5th time, and someone tried to burn it down with them inside. I'd applied to regular jobs under a fake name, but somehow employers always found out who I was. Even the grocery store said they couldn't hire someone with my reputation. I'd been physically attacked 3 times. I'd given up trying to figure out what I'd supposedly done when I got a DM from an account with no profile picture or followers. It just said, "You're not the first influencer this has happened to," and then the account disappeared before I could respond. I thought it was just another troll until they sent me one more message with a time and place to meet, and I was just desperate enough to go. The address led to an old warehouse district 40 minutes from where I'd been parking my car behind a Walmart. I pulled up to the building with its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls, keeping my engine running while I gripped the pepper spray I'd bought weeks ago. The sun was dropping behind the buildings and making long shadows that had me checking my mirrors every few seconds. My hands shook as I typed the address into a text to my old crisis manager's number, even though she'd blocked me months ago. At least if something bad happened, there'd be some record of where I went. I took photos of the building's front and the street signs, and started my phone's voice recorder before sliding it into my pocket. The metal door was already cracked open, and I pushed through into a space full of old machinery and concrete pillars. A woman stepped out from behind one of the pillars, and I almost ran, but she held up both hands to show they were empty. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady when she said her name was Reika. She pulled out her phone and showed me her Instagram profile from 2 years ago with 800,000 followers. Then she swiped to show her current account with barely 3,000. The pattern looked exactly like mine, with that same overnight drop from everything to nothing. She explained she'd been tracking other people this happened to and had found at least 12 cases so far. She'd been investigating for 8 months since her own cancellation, living off what was left of her savings while trying to figure out the system. I told her everything in a rush, the words spilling out about losing 1 million followers overnight and the $3 million lawsuit. I told her about my parents' house almost burning down and living in my car for 3 months now. She nodded and took notes on a tablet that wasn't connected to Wi-Fi, like she'd heard different versions of this same story before. She said we needed to document everything the right way without doing anything that could get us in more trouble. She handed me a list written on actual paper with types of records to gather, and warned me to only use cash from now on. She said she knew someone who ran a motel that took cash, and didn't ask questions where I could stay tonight. The thought of sleeping in a real bed instead of my back seat made my eyes burn, and I had to look away. She made a call on a flip phone and gave me an address 20 minutes away where a room would be waiting. The next morning, I woke up confused until I saw the water stains on the motel ceiling and remembered where I was. For just a second, I'd forgotten about everything, but then it all came crashing back. I thought about how my manager hadn't known what was happening and how the crisis firm had quit on me. I thought about my whole family cutting me off like I was some kind of monster they'd never really known. My phone buzzed with a text from Reka about a journalist named Logan Bray, who wrote about tech companies and their systems. She said he was careful and thorough, which was better than someone who just wanted clicks and drama. She'd already reached out to see if he'd talk to us and thought he might actually listen instead of dismissing everything. I drove to the nearest library and used their computers to set up new email accounts that couldn't be traced back to my real name. Every document I could still access got uploaded to new cloud storage, including all the termination letters from brands. I uploaded the lawsuit papers demanding $3 million and screenshots of thousands of death threats I'd gotten. Each file got organized into folders with dates and sources while I tried not to think about how this was my whole life reduced to evidence files. I started going through my old contracts that night in the motel room, spreading papers across the bed and squinting at the small print under the dim lamp. Every single termination letter used the exact same words about violating a morality clause, but none of them said what I actually did wrong. The makeup company's letter matched the athletic brand's letter word for word in that section, like someone had copied and pasted from the same template. I grabbed a highlighter and started marking the identical phrases across different company letters, the yellow streaks making a pattern that couldn't be coincidence. Reka came by the next morning with coffee and looked over my shoulder as I showed her the matching language. She pulled out her laptop and started comparing my termination emails to screenshots she'd saved from other victims. Her finger stopped on something in the corner of one email, and she zoomed in on a string of text I hadn't noticed. There was this weird code buried in the metadata that said, Risk Flag Pred 7749, and when she searched for it across all my emails, it showed up in messages from 5 different brands. She explained that companies subscribe to shared databases that flag influencers as risks, and this looked like an identifier from one of those systems. That evening, the burner phone Reka gave me rang, and it was Logan, the journalist she'd mentioned. His voice sounded tired but interested as he asked me to walk through my timeline again, wanting exact dates and times for everything. I told him about the overnight follower drop, when each platform banned me, when the brands sent their letters, all while he typed notes I could hear clicking through the phone. He asked for copies of everything I'd documented and gave me an encrypted email address to send them to. The next day, Reka showed me her laptop screen with screenshots of death threats that had been sent to a lawyer who briefly agreed to take her case last year. The messages were brutal, threatening to destroy the lawyer's practice and hurt her family if she kept helping Reka. My stomach turned thinking about dragging more people into this nightmare, but Reka said we couldn't fight this alone. I spent the afternoon calling law firms from a list Isabel had given other victims, using different burner phones for each call. The first firm's receptionist put me on hold, and then came back saying they couldn't take new clients right now. The second firm let me explain for 30 seconds before saying they didn't handle my type of case even though their website said they did reputation law. The third firm actually seemed interested until I said my name, and then suddenly remembered they had a full caseload. The fourth firm said they had a conflict of interest, which made no sense, since I'd never used them or even heard of them before. After 2 days of rejections, Reka finally connected me with someone named Isabel Rainey, who specialized in tech accountability cases. She agreed to a video consultation, but warned me up front that her resources were limited since bigger firms wouldn't touch cases like mine. During our call, she listened without interrupting as I explained everything, taking notes and asking specific questions about dates and documentation. 3 days later, Logan called back after reviewing all my documents and said the pattern was too consistent across different victims to be random. He wanted to see everything Reka had collected on the other people this happened to, so he could look for common factors. Isabel called me that afternoon and explained something called data access requests that could force platforms and vendors to share what information they had on me. She said it was a legal process that might reveal who originally flagged me as a risk and why they did it. She sent me templates and walked me through the specific legal language each request needed to include. I spent 2 full days at the library writing and filing formal data requests to Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and 5 companies Isabel identified as reputation management vendors. Each request needed different wording for their specific policies, and I had to include notarized copies of my ID to prove who I was. My hand cramped from signing so many documents, and the notary at the bank started recognizing me by the 3rd trip. Isabel reviewed each request before I sent them, making small changes to the legal language to make sure they couldn't reject them on technicalities. The requests went out by certified mail with tracking numbers, so we'd have proof they received them. A week later, Rekha texted me about someone who used to work at one of these reputation companies and might be willing to talk. She set up an encrypted video chat with someone named Tao Brooks, who appeared on my laptop screen with his face slightly blurred and using a voice modifier. He looked nervous, constantly glancing around like someone might be watching, but he said he wanted to help because he'd seen how broken these systems were. He started explaining how risk feeds worked, these automated systems that scan millions of posts looking for keywords or patterns that might indicate someone was dangerous. Once you got flagged in one system, he said, it would spread to every company subscribed to that feed within hours through something called API connections. The companies trusted these risk scores completely without doing any verification, because checking would take time and money they didn't want to spend. He pulled up a diagram on his laptop showing how one bad flag could destroy someone in under 6 hours. The screen showed arrows connecting dozens of companies to a central hub labeled Risk Assessment Feed, with red lines spreading out like poison through a network. He pointed to the timestamps showing how fast the data moved between systems. According to his notes, once someone got marked as high risk in the main database, every subscriber would get an alert within minutes. The companies never checked if the information was right because manual review would slow everything down. He showed me screenshots of the actual interface these companies used, with simple red and green lights next to influencer names. Red meant cut ties immediately without asking questions. He said the worst part was how these systems mixed up people with similar usernames all the time. If someone named Sarah_M_123 did something bad, Sarah_M_124 might get flagged too, because the system only checked partial matches. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. The companies knew about these problems, but fixing them would cost millions, and they figured a few false positives were worth avoiding one real scandal. Rekha interrupted to mention she'd been building a list of other people this happened to. She said there was a small encrypted chat group where victims shared their stories and tried to find patterns. She could try to get me added if I wanted, but warned me some people in there were pretty angry and desperate. I wasn't sure about trusting strangers online again, but realized I needed to hear what happened to them to understand if this was really systematic. That night, back at the motel, I started creating a detailed timeline on paper, marking exactly when each platform banned me and when each brand sent termination emails. I used different colored pens to track the sequence and noticed something strange immediately. Everything clustered around one specific weekend in March, with most actions happening within a 48-hour window. Instagram banned me Friday night at 11:47 p.m. TikTok followed Saturday morning at 6:23 a.m. YouTube demonetized me Saturday afternoon at 2:15 p.m. The brand emails all came between Saturday evening and Sunday afternoon, like dominoes falling in perfect order. Something triggered this cascade that Friday night, but I still had no idea what. I spent the next 3 days calling every brand that dropped me, using different phones and fake names to try reaching someone who might talk. Most hung up immediately when I mentioned my real name. Finally, I got through to someone in customer service at the athletic wear company who sounded young and nervous. She whispered that they'd received a confidential assessment packet about me that weekend, but couldn't say more. Before I could ask another question, she said her supervisor was coming and hung up. At least now I had confirmation that something coordinated happened, not just random decisions by different companies. A week later, the first data access response arrived by certified mail. The platform had sent a thick envelope full of mostly blacked-out pages, with entire sections marked proprietary information, or third-party confidential. But on page 47, I found one line they'd missed redacting that mentioned an external vendor assessment with code PRED7749, dated that Friday night. The same code I'd seen in several termination emails, finally proving they were all using the same source. My hands shook as I photographed the page and sent it to Isabel. She called within minutes saying this was exactly what we needed to show coordination. Walking back to my motel after mailing more data requests, I noticed a dark sedan had been behind me since I left the post office. I turned right at the next corner and the car followed. I crossed the street and it stayed with me. After 3 blocks of this, I ducked into a convenience store and called 911 from the payphone. The operator sounded bored as I explained someone was following me. 2 officers showed up 20 minutes later and took a report, though they seemed skeptical about the whole thing. They said without a license plate or proof of threat, there wasn't much they could do. I gave them the case number from my previous harassment reports and they said they'd add it to my file. The sedan was gone when I finally left the store an hour later. Isabel sent what she called spoliation letters to 3 reputation vendors the next day, legally requiring them to preserve all records about me. She explained that if they deleted anything now, it would be destruction of evidence, which carried serious penalties including criminal charges. The letters went out by certified mail with signature confirmation required. She said this would stop them from erasing their tracks while we built our case. Meanwhile, Rekha got me added to the encrypted chat group she'd mentioned. Reading through the previous messages was like looking in a mirror. Story after story of overnight destruction. Identical termination letters with the same vague language and those mysterious risk codes appearing everywhere. A fitness influencer lost everything after being confused with someone who promoted dangerous diet pills. A travel blogger got erased because their username matched a scammer's. A gaming streamer lost their entire career when the system mixed them up with someone sharing illegal content. We were all different types of creators, but the playbook used against us was exactly the same. Logan had been digging into the reputation intelligence industry and discovered a small firm called Verdict Tech that kept appearing in our research. They advertised comprehensive risk assessment for brand safety and claimed to monitor millions of influencers in real time. He found leaked documents from a former employee who'd sued them for wrongful termination. Our risk codes appeared multiple times in their internal communications about something called the automated flagging pipeline. The second platform finally sent their data export 3 weeks after my request. Buried in the technical logs, I found my account linked to something called a hashed entity ID that didn't match my actual username at all. When I sent this to Isabel, she got excited immediately. She said this suggested they'd mixed up my identity with someone else entirely in their backend systems. Exactly what we'd been suspecting all along. Tao jumped on our next video call and pulled up his screen to show us exactly how these systems worked. He pointed at lines of code while explaining that Verdict Tech's system would scan millions of usernames across every platform looking for bad actors, but their matching algorithm was garbage. If someone named Sarah_Rose94 got caught selling drugs on some random forum, their system might flag every variation like Sarah Rose, Sarah, Rose, or even just anyone with Rose in their handle. The error would hit their database and within seconds get pushed out to every brand that subscribed to their feed. He showed us actual examples from his old job where a gaming streamer got mixed up with a crypto scammer just because they both had Wolf in their usernames. The brands never checked if it was the same person. They just saw the risk score and cut ties to protect themselves. I started messaging everyone in our encrypted chat, asking them to check their entity IDs and usernames against actual bad actors. Within hours, the responses came flooding back. A fitness coach found her account linked to someone selling steroids who had a similar Instagram handle. A food blogger discovered she'd been mixed up with someone running diet pill scams because they both used variations of healthy in their names. Every single person in our group had been confused with an actual criminal or scammer through these broken matching systems. The patterns were identical down to the timing, and those same risk codes appearing everywhere. We documented everything in a shared spreadsheet that Isabel said would be crucial evidence. I decided to try one more time with my old manager, sending her all our findings about the Verdict Tech errors. I explained how their system had mixed me up with someone else and begged her to look at the evidence. 3 days later, a courier showed up at my motel with a thick envelope. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter from her lawyer stating that any further contact would be considered harassment, and they would seek a restraining order. The letter threatened legal action if I ever mentioned her name in connection with this situation. My hands shook as I read it and realized she was more scared of the brands than interested in the truth. Logan had been working his contacts in the tech industry for weeks, trying to get someone to talk on record. Most people hung up the moment he mentioned Verdict Tech, but finally someone at a small athletic wear company agreed to meet him at a diner outside the city. The source wouldn't let Logan record but confirmed they'd received a risk assessment packet about me that weekend, along with hundreds of other influencers. The packet came through their automated brand safety dashboard and triggered immediate contract termination protocols. The source said similar packets went to every brand in their network simultaneously, creating a cascade effect where everyone dropped the flagged influencers within hours. Logan couldn't use the source's name, but now we had confirmation of the coordinated nature of the attack. Isabel spent 3 days drafting formal demand letters to Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Verdict Tech, and 2 other reputation vendors we'd identified called Brand Shield and Safety First. The letters cited specific laws about defamation, tortious interference, and negligent data handling. She demanded full disclosure of their assessment methods, all data they had on me, and compensation for the massive damages their errors had caused. Each letter had to be crafted carefully to avoid giving them any excuse to ignore us or claim we were making threats. She sent them all by certified mail with signature confirmation, creating a legal paper trail we could use later. I was walking back from getting cheap takeout when I noticed my motel room door was open. The window next to it had a huge hole with glass everywhere. The manager was already there taking photos and said someone had thrown a brick while I was gone. We found the brick with Predator written on it in black marker. The manager pulled up the security footage on his ancient computer, and we watched a figure in a hoodie run up, throw the brick and speed off in a car. I called the police and waited 2 hours for them to show up. They took another report and added it to my growing file of harassment incidents. The officer said without a clear view of the attacker's face there wasn't much they could do, but at least we were building documentation. Isabel said every police report strengthened our case about the real-world harm these false accusations caused. 2 weeks after Isabel sent the demand letters, Verdict Tech's legal team finally responded. They denied any wrongdoing and claimed their risk assessment was protected under free speech. But buried in the 3rd page was an interesting admission that they'd discontinued their high-risk influencer feed 3 months ago due to what they called accuracy concerns. They wouldn't admit I was on that feed, but the timing matched perfectly with when I got canceled. Isabel highlighted that section and said it was as close to a confession as we'd probably get from them. The other vendors sent similar denials full of legal language designed to avoid any admission of fault. Then things got weird. An anonymous email showed up in my spam folder with the subject line, You deserve to know the truth. Attached was what looked like internal verdict tech documentation, showing their entire risk scoring pipeline. The document had employee names, timestamps, and technical details about how their system worked. It showed how a single false flag from any source would automatically trigger their highest risk classification, which then got broadcast to their entire client base within minutes. I forwarded it to Logan immediately. He spent the next 4 days analyzing every detail of the leaked document. He checked the metadata, cross-referenced the employee names, and even found some of the mentioned internal tools on Verdict Tech's developer forums. Through careful technical analysis and source network mapping, he confirmed the document was real. It revealed massive flaws in how they assessed threats, including no human review process, and no way to correct errors once they entered the system. The document showed they knew about these problems but kept selling the service anyway. Tao took Logan's findings and created a detailed diagram showing exactly how one mistake in Verdict Tech's system could destroy someone's life. He mapped out how a false flag would hit their central database, get assigned the highest risk score, then broadcast to hundreds of brands through automated API subscriptions. The brand's own systems would receive the alert and trigger immediate termination protocols without any human ever reviewing the case. Within 6 hours of the initial error, every brand partnership would be gone, platforms would ban the account, and the person's life would be ruined. The diagram made it clear this wasn't a bug, but a feature designed for speed over accuracy. Isabel said we needed to confront the brands directly with what we'd found, so I drove to the headquarters of the makeup company that was suing me for $3 million. The glass building looked the same as when I'd come here for partnership meetings just 6 months ago. I walked through the lobby holding a folder with all our printed evidence and asked the receptionist to see their brand partnership director. She recognized me and her face went cold before she picked up the phone and whispered something I couldn't hear. 2 security guards showed up within minutes and stood behind me while I waited. The partnership director finally came down, but wouldn't make eye contact and kept backing away when I tried to show her the documents. I held up the papers showing the Verdict Tech error codes and started explaining how their system had flagged me by mistake, but she cut me off saying they couldn't discuss anything due to their NDA with Verdict Tech. I pulled out my phone and started recording, asking her on camera if they'd ever verified the claims before destroying my career. The security guards grabbed my arms and dragged me toward the exit while I kept filming and asking why they trusted an automated system over 3 years of working together. They shoved me out the door and told me I was banned from the property. Isabel watched the video I'd recorded and said it was good documentation, but we needed a different approach since direct confrontation wasn't working. She suggested we go public with a carefully written statement that showed the evidence without making claims that could get us sued for defamation. We spent the next 2 days working on a Medium post that laid out the timeline, showed the redacted error codes, and explained how the system worked without directly accusing anyone of lying. Isabel reviewed every sentence to make sure we weren't crossing any legal lines while still telling the truth about what happened. I uploaded screenshots of the termination emails with the matching codes highlighted, the leaked Verdict Tech documents with employee names blacked out, and Tao's diagram showing how one error spread everywhere. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely type as I added the final section about losing my home and family over a computer glitch. I stared at the publish button for 20 minutes, knowing this could either help clear my name or give them more ammunition to destroy what was left of my life. I finally clicked it and watched the view counter start climbing immediately. Within 3 hours, a tech blog called The Algorithm Report picked up the story and wrote their own piece about the dangers of automated reputation systems. Then another blog covered it, and another. And by that evening, 5 different sites had articles about my case. The comments were brutal, with about half calling me a liar trying to cover up whatever I'd really done, and the other half sharing their own stories of getting banned or fired because of automated systems. Someone found my old Instagram posts and started a thread trying to figure out what could have triggered the system. Others were analyzing the code patterns and comparing them to similar leaks from other tech companies. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Verdict Tech's legal team with a cease and desist letter attached. They said I'd violated confidentiality by publishing their internal documents and threatened to sue for damages if I didn't take down the post immediately. Isabel read through it and laughed, saying they were trying to intimidate me, but didn't have a real case since we were exposing consumer harm, which gave us whistleblower protection. She drafted a response explaining that we had every right to share evidence of systematic failures that destroyed people's lives and careers. Meanwhile, Logan was working on his own investigation and had found 2 other influencers who'd gone through the exact same thing with the same codes and timing. They were scared to go public but agreed to talk on background, sharing their termination letters and the harassment they'd faced. Their stories matched mine perfectly, down to the coffee attacks and death threats. One of them had lost custody of her kids when her ex used the accusations in court, even though there was no actual evidence of wrongdoing. Tao kept digging through old Verdict Tech files and found something huge in their internal chat logs. There was a whole category called Pred2 that was supposed to flag predatory behavior, but the detection system was broken and matching based on partial username similarities instead of actual content. If someone with a username like Predator Gaming got flagged, anyone with Pred anywhere in their handle might get caught in the same net. My old gaming account from high school had predict this as the username, and that was enough to trigger their highest risk classification. Isabel took all this new evidence and filed formal complaints with 3 different state agencies for unfair business practices and consumer fraud. She included everything we'd found showing how Verdict Tech knew their system was broken, but kept selling it anyway. The complaints were public record so journalists could access them and start investigating on their own. A local newspaper reporter reached out wanting to do a story about the real-world impact of these false accusations. She'd covered the coffee shop attack when it happened, and wanted to follow up on how the harassment had affected my life. I met her at a diner and told her about sleeping in my car, my parents' house getting vandalized and losing every source of income overnight. The article came out 2 days later with the headline, "When Algorithms Destroy Lives," and included photos of the vandalism and police reports. The comment section was less hostile than before, with more people starting to question whether I'd actually done anything wrong. But within hours of that article going live, new rumors started showing up on gossip forums claiming I'd done horrible things that weren't even mentioned in the original cancellation. Rekha saw them first and recognized the pattern immediately since the same thing happened to her when she started fighting back. She said Verdict Tech or their clients often seeded these forums with fresh accusations to muddy the waters when victims gained traction. Rekha pulled up old court documents on her laptop and showed me the lawsuit she'd filed against 3 platforms and Verdict Tech 2 years ago. She'd spent $40,000 on lawyers, and after 12 months of depositions and motions, she ran out of money and had to drop the case. She pointed to a stack of boxes in the corner of her apartment filled with discovery documents that proved the systems were broken, but no judge would look at them without proper legal representation. She warned me that even if we won, our names would never be fully cleared because the internet never forgets, but fighting back still mattered for the next person who gets destroyed by these systems. Isabel called me the next morning saying she'd found 3 law students from UCLA who wanted to help prepare subpoenas for their litigation clinic credits. They came to her office that afternoon with laptops and legal pads, eager to work on a case that actually mattered instead of mock trials. We spent 6 hours going through every document, creating a database of evidence and drafting preservation letters to send to every company that had cut ties with me. Isabel's students found legal precedents for algorithmic harm cases and started building arguments about negligent data practices and defamation through automated systems. We sent certified letters to 37 companies demanding they preserve all records related to my account termination and risk assessment scores. Verdict Tech's legal team called Isabel's office within 48 hours, requesting a confidential discussion about potential resolution. Their lawyer hinted they might offer a settlement if we signed comprehensive NDAs preventing us from ever discussing their systems publicly. Isabel told them we wouldn't accept any deal that silenced us and hung up. They called back 3 days later with a different lawyer who sounded more nervous. During this second call, he let slip that Verdict Tech had deployed what he called an entity conflation fix to their systems last month that affected numerous accounts. He wouldn't confirm I was one of the affected accounts, but the timing matched perfectly with when some of the harassment had started dying down slightly. Isabel recorded the call legally and added it to our evidence file. I checked Instagram on a random Tuesday morning and nearly dropped my phone when I saw my account was no longer showing as permanently banned. The page now said temporary suspension with a review date 6 months out, though my followers were still gone and all my content remained deleted. It was a tiny change, but it meant they knew they'd made a mistake and were quietly trying to walk it back without admitting fault. Isabel had a friend who managed properties and didn't care about internet drama, just reliable tenants who paid on time. She vouched for me, and I signed a lease for a small studio apartment in Koreatown, paying 3 months upfront with money I'd borrowed from the encrypted chat group's emergency fund. Loading my few possessions from my car into an actual apartment felt surreal after living in parking lots for so long. I set up a mattress on the floor and hung my 3 remaining outfits in the empty closet, but having a door that locked and a shower that worked felt like reclaiming a piece of my humanity. Isabel's assistant noticed something interesting while reviewing the class action lawsuit updates. 3 of the smaller brands had quietly withdrawn from the suit without any announcement or explanation. The total damages claim had dropped from $3 million to $500,000, though that was still more money than I'd ever be able to pay back. She pulled the court records and found the withdrawal happened the same week Verdict Tech announced their system updates. The detective who'd taken my harassment reports called with actual good news for once. They'd arrested the person who threw coffee in my face after matching them to 2 other attacks on different influencers through security footage and witness statements. The local news covered the arrest, and I watched the footage of them being led away in handcuffs, finally seeing some form of justice after months of being treated like I deserved the violence. Logan's investigation piece went live on a major tech publication's website at midnight on a Thursday. He'd spent weeks fact-checking every detail and getting legal review, carefully documenting how risk-feed systems destroy lives without naming every victim to protect our privacy. The article included screenshots of the leaked Verdict Tech documents with key sections highlighted showing how their broken classification system spread false flags across hundreds of platforms simultaneously. Tech industry insiders started sharing it immediately, and by morning it had over 1 million views with heated discussions in the comments about the dangers of automated reputation systems. Tao texted me that night saying 3 of his former colleagues at Verdict Tech had reached out privately after reading Logan's article. They admitted they knew the Pred 2 classification system was matching people incorrectly, but management ignored their concerns because fixing it would require admitting liability. One of them sent Tao internal emails showing employees raising red flags about false positives months before I got canceled, proving the company knew their product was destroying innocent people but kept selling it anyway. Another former employee shared that they'd tried to implement safeguards but got overruled because it would slow down the scanning process and make the product less competitive. These people expressed guilt about their role in ruining lives, but were too scared of lawsuits and industry blacklisting to go public with what they knew. The next week, Reka organized a video call with 12 other victims, and we spent 3 hours sharing what worked and what didn't in our fights for answers. One person had templates for data requests that actually got responses instead of being ignored. Another had a list of lawyers who wouldn't immediately hang up. When they heard our stories and someone else had created a spreadsheet tracking which platforms responded to which types of legal threats. We built a shared folder with everything we'd learned, adding contact info for the few journalists who took us seriously, and warning notes about lawyers who'd taken money then disappeared. I copied every template and resource into multiple backups, knowing this information could help the next person who woke up to find their life destroyed overnight. 2 days later, Verdict Tech put out a press release about enhancing their data verification processes and improving accuracy in their risk assessment tools, never mentioning us or admitting fault, but the timing was obvious to anyone paying attention. The statement was full of corporate speak about their commitment to excellence and continuous improvement, but buried in paragraph 4 was a line about discontinuing certain legacy classification systems that had been identified as potentially problematic. Logan texted me a screenshot with the key sentence highlighted, adding that 3 of his sources confirmed this was damage control after our evidence started circulating among their biggest clients. I spent the weekend finally accepting what I'd been avoiding for months, that my influencer career was permanently dead, and I needed to find a different way to survive. I updated my resume with a fake name and focused on the technical skills I'd developed: content scheduling, engagement analytics, community management, leaving out anything that could connect me to my real identity. The few interviews I managed to get always ended the same way when they Googled something and figured out who I was, their faces changing from interested to uncomfortable as they rushed through the rest of the questions. Reka called me one afternoon saying she knew someone who needed help managing business social media accounts and didn't care about my past as long as I could do the job. The company imported specialty teas and just needed someone to post product photos, respond to customer comments, and track basic metrics. Nothing that required showing my face or using my real name. The owner met me at a coffee shop, looked at my portfolio of anonymous work I'd done for other victims in our group, and offered me 20 hours a week at barely above minimum wage. I accepted immediately, grateful to have any income that didn't require explaining my situation or worrying about background checks. Setting up their content calendar from my small apartment felt strange but safe. Managing accounts for a business that just wanted more engagement on their tea photos instead of influence over millions. My sister's text came while I was scheduling posts about a new green tea blend. Just 3 words at first asking if we could talk. She'd read Logan's article and wanted to understand what really happened, though she was careful to say she needed boundaries about what we discussed. We agreed to one phone call where I could explain the technical stuff about Verdict Tech systems without getting into the emotional damage of being abandoned by everyone I loved. She listened for an hour, asked a few questions about the documentation, then said she needed time to process everything before we talked again. Isabel filed our lawsuit 2 weeks later, focusing specifically on the entity conflation that destroyed our lives and the measurable damages from false data being sold as fact. She'd found 3 technical experts willing to testify about how Verdict Tech's system couldn't distinguish between similar usernames across platforms, treating anyone with vaguely matching handles as the same person. The filing was dense with technical details about data processing, probability matching, and the lack of human verification before destroying someone's reputation. She said we had a strong case for setting precedent about accountability when automated systems sold false information as verified risk assessments. The podcast invitation came through our victim support network. Someone who'd been covering tech accountability wanted to hear from someone who'd lived through algorithmic destruction. I spent a week preparing what I wanted to say, practicing how to tell my story without naming specific people who might sue me for defamation, even though everything I'd say was true. Recording in my apartment closet with blankets hung to muffle echo, I talked for 2 hours about waking up to find my life destroyed by invisible systems no one would acknowledge existed. The host sent me the edited episode before it went live. 45 minutes of my voice explaining how data errors become permanent truth when enough companies buy the same false information. After it posted, dozens of people wrote in with their own stories of unexplained bans, mysterious blacklisting, and careers destroyed by systems they couldn't see or challenge. Sitting at my small desk covered in legal documents, rental agreements, and printed emails from our lawsuit, I wasn't vindicated or restored, but I was surviving with shelter I could afford, steady if modest income from the tea company, and real allies who understood what we'd been through. Most importantly, I had proof that I wasn't crazy or evil, just another casualty of broken systems that companies kept using, because fixing them would mean admitting they'd been selling lies as truth. And that's today's story wrapped up. Hopefully there's a takeaway you can use, because that's always the goal here. Subscribe and you'll never miss the next one.